Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled twice, and that Seth MacFarlane almost died on September 11th, which completely changed the show's trajectory forever? What if I told you that the Griffin family house has a secret basement that's been hidden in plain sight for over 2 decades? Or that Stewie's sexuality was originally planned to be revealed in a completely different way that would have shocked audiences worldwide? Welcome back to another deep dive into animated television history. I'm your host, and today we're exploring the most mind-blowing Family Guy lore that even die-hard fans probably don't know about. From behind-the-scenes secrets that nearly destroyed the show to hidden Easter eggs that connect to other animated universes, this is going to be one wild ride through Quahog and beyond. But before we jump into this rabbit hole of shocking revelations, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we're about to uncover some seriously explosive content that YouTube's algorithm doesn't want you to see. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never watch Family Guy the same way again. Let's start with something that will absolutely blow your mind. Seth MacFarlane was originally supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th, 2001. Yes, you heard that right. The creator of Family Guy was supposed to be on the first plane that hit the World Trade Center. He missed the flight by just 10 minutes because of a hangover and a travel agent who gave him the wrong departure time. This near-death experience completely changed his perspective on life and directly influenced the darker, more satirical direction that Family Guy would eventually take in its later seasons. Think about this for a second. If MacFarlane had been on that flight, we would never have gotten the revival seasons of Family Guy, American Dad, or The Orville. The entire landscape of animated comedy would be completely different. But here's where it gets even more twisted. MacFarlane has admitted in interviews that this experience made him realize how fragile life really is, which is why the show became increasingly more nihilistic and dark as the years went on. The random violence, the complete disregard for character development, and the increasingly absurd situations all stem from this one life-changing moment. Now let's talk about something that will make you question everything you think you know about the Griffin family. The house at 31 Spooner Street has a secret basement that's been featured in multiple episodes. But here's what most people don't realize. This basement connects to a network of underground tunnels that run throughout all of Quahog. These tunnels have appeared in at least 7 different episodes across various seasons, but they're never explicitly connected or explained. In one episode, we see Peter emerge from a manhole cover near the drunken clam. In another, Stewie discovers a hidden passage behind his bedroom wall. That leads to what appears to be the same tunnel system. The most revealing moment comes in a throwaway gag where Brian is chasing a tennis ball and disappears down a storm drain, only to emerge from the Griffin's basement minutes later. This isn't just random comedy writing. There's actually a consistent underground geography to Quahog that the writers have been building for years. But here's where it gets really interesting. These tunnels connect to similar underground systems in other Seth MacFarlane shows. If you pay close attention to certain episodes of American Dad, you'll notice that the CIA headquarters has access to tunnels that look remarkably similar to the ones in Family Guy. There's even a brief scene in the Cleveland show where Cleveland falls through his floorboards and lands in what appears to be the same tunnel system before the scene cuts away. This suggests that all of MacFarlane's animated universes might actually be connected through this underground network. It's like a multiverse theory, but instead of parallel dimensions, it's all happening in the same world with hidden connections that most viewers never notice. Speaking of hidden connections, let's talk about Stewie Griffin and the most controversial aspect of his character development. Everyone knows that Stewie's sexuality has been a topic of debate for years, with MacFarlane giving contradictory statements about whether the character is gay, straight, or something else entirely. But here's what most people don't know. There was originally a planned storyline that would have definitively answered this question, and it was going to be revealed in the most shocking way possible. According to leaked production documents from 2008, there was a planned 2-part episode called Stewie's Choice that would have featured an adult version of Stewie traveling back in time to have a conversation with his infant self about his future identity. The adult Stewie was going to reveal that he's actually pansexual, and that his early obsession with matricide was actually a misdirected expression of his confusion about his own identity and place in the world. The episode was going to explore how Stewie's advanced intelligence and emotional maturity as an infant made him aware of concepts and feelings that he couldn't properly process or understand. His violent fantasies about Lois were supposed to represent his frustration with being trapped in a body and family situation that couldn't accommodate his true nature. It would have been groundbreaking television, addressing themes of identity, sexuality, and family dynamics in a way that animated comedy had never attempted before. But the episode was scrapped at the last minute because Fox executives were concerned about the potential backlash from conservative viewers and advertisers. Instead, we got the ambiguous approach that the show has maintained ever since, with Stewie's sexuality remaining deliberately unclear. MacFarlane has expressed regret about this decision in later interviews, saying that he wishes he had fought harder to tell that story. This brings us to one of the most shocking pieces of Family Guy lore that involves the show's cancellation and revival. Most fans know that Family Guy was canceled after 3 seasons and then brought back due to strong DVD sales and Adult Swim reruns. But what most people don't know is that during the cancellation period, there was a secret season that was produced but never aired. This lost season, sometimes referred to as Season 0, by animators who worked on it, consisted of 13 episodes that were completed between 2003 and 2004. These episodes were darker, more experimental, and pushed boundaries that even the current version of Family Guy wouldn't dare cross. One episode featured Peter accidentally killing a neighbor and the entire family having to cover it up. Another showed Brian dealing with severe depression and contemplating suicide after a failed relationship. The most controversial episode in this lost season was titled The Real Quahog, and it was essentially a behind-the-scenes look at what the Griffin family's life would be like if they were real people instead of cartoon characters. It showed them dealing with real consequences for their actions, real trauma from their experiences, and real psychological damage from the constant chaos in their lives. Peter was portrayed as an alcoholic with severe brain damage from his countless accidents. Lois was shown struggling with depression and prescription drug abuse. Chris was in therapy for the emotional abuse he'd suffered, and Meg was revealed to be self-harming as a way to cope with her family's treatment of her. This episode was deemed too dark and realistic for television, even by Adult Swim standards. The entire lost season was shelved, and when Family Guy was revived in 2005, the show went in a completely different direction, embracing the absurdist comedy that defines the modern era of the show. But here's the really crazy part. Some of the storylines and jokes from these lost episodes have been recycled and incorporated into later seasons, but in much more sanitized and comedic ways. If you know what to look for, you can actually spot elements from the lost season scattered throughout episodes from seasons 4 through 10. Let's shift gears and talk about something that will completely change how you view the show's animation and production. Family Guy uses a technique called limited animation, which is common in television cartoons, but they've hidden several advanced animation techniques throughout the series that most viewers never notice. There are at least 12 episodes that feature what animation experts call rotoscoping, where live-action footage is traced over to create more realistic movement. This technique was used primarily in fight scenes and dance sequences, but it was also used in some of the show's most emotional moments to create more nuanced facial expressions and body language. The most impressive example of this is in the episode where Brian and Stewie are trapped in a bank vault. The entire conversation between the two characters was actually performed by live actors first, with Seth MacFarlane and another voice actor acting out the scene in a recording studio. This footage was then rotoscoped to create the animation, which is why that episode feels so much more intimate and realistic than typical Family Guy episodes. This technique has been used sparingly throughout the series, always in moments where the writers wanted to create genuine emotional connection with the audience. It's one of the reasons why certain episodes feel so much more impactful than others, even though most viewers can't pinpoint exactly why. Now let's dive into something that connects Family Guy to real-world events in ways that are both fascinating and slightly disturbing. The show has accidentally predicted or coincidentally referenced several major news events before they actually happened. This isn't just about the Boston Marathon bombing episode that was pulled from circulation. There are dozens of smaller predictions and coincidences that suggest either incredible luck or some kind of insider knowledge. In a 2001 episode, there's a throwaway joke about airport security being ineffective that aired just 2 months before September 11th. A 2003 episode featured a gag about a pandemic shutting down the world that's eerily similar to what happened with COVID-19 17 years later. There's even an episode from 2007 that jokes about social media destroying democracy, which feels remarkably prescient given everything that's happened with Facebook and Twitter in recent years. The most unsettling prediction came in a 2004 episode that featured a throwaway gag about a reality TV star becoming president and destroying American foreign policy. This was 5 years before Donald Trump even appeared on The Apprentice, and 13 years before he actually became president. These coincidences have led to conspiracy theories about the show's writers having inside information or being part of some larger cultural manipulation scheme. While that's obviously nonsense, it does highlight how satirical comedy often accidentally stumbles onto truth by exaggerating current trends to their logical extremes. Here's something that will blow your mind about the show's voice acting. Seth MacFarlane doesn't just voice multiple main characters. He actually performs entire conversations with himself, acting out complex emotional scenes between different characters in real time. This requires an incredible level of vocal and emotional control that most people don't appreciate. But here's the really impressive part. MacFarlane has admitted that he sometimes gets so deep into character during recording sessions that he actually forgets which voice he's supposed to be using. There are outtakes where you can hear him starting a line as Peter and finishing it as Brian, or beginning as Stewie and ending as Quagmire. These mistakes are usually caught in editing, but occasionally they make it into the final episode as intentional jokes or character moments. The most impressive vocal performance in the show's history is probably the episode where Stewie and Brian are trapped in the vault, which we mentioned earlier. MacFarlane performed both sides of that 20-minute conversation live, switching between characters fluidly while maintaining the emotional authenticity of both performances. It's a masterclass in voice acting that most people take for granted because they're focused on the jokes and story. Let's talk about something that connects Family Guy to the broader world of animation in ways that most people never realize. The show has actually influenced the development of animation technology in significant ways. The techniques developed for Family Guy's cutaway gags have been adopted by other animated shows, and some of the software innovations created specifically for Family Guy are now industry standard. The show was one of the first animated series to use digital ink and paint techniques exclusively, abandoning traditional cell animation years before other shows made the switch. This allowed for more complex visual effects and faster production times, but it also created a distinctive visual style that influenced countless other animated series. More importantly, Family Guy pioneered several techniques for creating rapid scene transitions and visual gags that are now used throughout animated television. The quick cuts, the seamless transitions between reality and fantasy sequences, and the integration of different animation styles within single episodes all originated with Family Guy and have since become standard tools in animated comedy. Here's something that will surprise you about the show's writing process. Unlike most television shows, Family Guy doesn't use a traditional writer's room structure. Instead, the writers work in small teams of 2 or 3 people, developing individual segments and gags that are then assembled into full episodes by a separate editorial team. This explains why Family Guy episodes often feel like collections of loosely connected skits rather than coherent narratives. It's not a bug in the writing process, it's a feature. The show is designed to work like a comedy variety show, with each segment standing on its own while contributing to a larger comedic experience. The cutaway gags are written by a completely different team of writers who specialize in creating short-form comedy content. These writers often don't even know what episodes their gags will be used in. They just create libraries of content that the editorial team draws from when assembling episodes. This system allows for incredible creative flexibility, but it also means that the show's quality can vary wildly from episode to episode, depending on which combination of writers and editors are working on any given installment. Now let's explore something that connects Family Guy to other forms of media in unexpected ways. The show has actually influenced the development of internet meme culture more than most people realize. Many of the comedic techniques that are now standard in online comedy content originated with Family Guy's approach to humor. The random cutaway gag structure that defines Family Guy is essentially the same format used in modern social media content, where short, disconnected pieces of entertainment are strung together to create longer experiences. The show's influence can be seen in everything from TikTok videos to YouTube compilations to internet memes. More specifically, Family Guy popularized the idea of referential humor that doesn't require deep knowledge of the reference to be funny. The show's pop culture parodies work even if you don't know what's being parodied, which is now a fundamental principle of internet comedy. As we wrap up this deep dive into Family Guy lore, let's talk about the most shocking revelation of all. There's evidence to suggest that the show is actually much more carefully planned and deliberately crafted than its chaotic surface suggests. Despite appearing random and improvisational, Family Guy follows complex narrative patterns and character development arcs that span multiple seasons. The show uses what narrative theorists call spiral storytelling, where characters appear to remain static but actually undergo subtle changes that accumulate over time. Peter may seem like the same character he was in Season 1, but if you watch carefully, you can see how his experiences have gradually shaped his worldview and behavior patterns. This sophisticated storytelling approach is disguised by the show's crude humor and seemingly random structure, but it's there for viewers who know how to look for it. It's one of the reasons why Family Guy has remained culturally relevant for over 2 decades, while many other animated comedies have faded into obscurity. The show's longevity isn't just due to its shock value or pop culture references. It's because underneath all the chaos and controversy, there's actually a carefully constructed narrative universe with consistent internal logic and genuine character development. So there you have it. Family Guy isn't just a random collection of offensive jokes and pop culture references. It's a complex, carefully crafted piece of entertainment that has influenced animation technology, comedy writing, internet culture, and narrative television in ways that most people never realize. These revelations should completely change how you watch the show going forward. Every episode contains layers of meaning, technical innovation, and cultural commentary that extend far beyond the surface-level humor. The Griffin family's adventures in Quahog are actually part of a much larger and more sophisticated entertainment universe than anyone could have imagined. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden depths of Family Guy, make sure you like and subscribe for more deep dives into the secret histories of your favorite shows. And let me know in the comments which piece of Family Guy lore surprised you the most. Until next time, keep looking for the hidden stories behind the stories you think you know. Picture this. You're lying in bed, phone in hand, ready to drift off to the soothing sound of random Family Guy trivia. Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because tonight we're diving deep into the most bizarre, shocking, and downright disturbing moments that have happened to every single character in Quahog. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your favorite dysfunctional cartoon family the same way again. Now, before we start this journey through animated trauma, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if the worst day of your life was broadcast on national television for millions to laugh at? Well, that's basically every episode of Family Guy for these poor fictional souls. So grab your favorite pillow, get comfortable, and let's explore the darkest corners of Seth MacFarlane's twisted imagination. Starting alphabetically with Adam West, because why not begin with a mayor who's nuttier than a fruitcake? This eccentric political figure finally found his soulmate when he married Carol, Lois's sister. For a guy who regularly talks to his own hand and thinks cardboard cutouts are real people, finding true love seemed like a miracle. The wedding was beautiful, the honeymoon was passionate, and for once in his bizarre life, Adam West looked genuinely happy. But happiness in Family Guy is like a snowball in hell. It melts faster than you can say cutaway gag. Carol decided that one mayor wasn't enough for her appetite, so she started having an affair with another man. When Adam discovered this betrayal, instead of walking away with his dignity intact, he challenged the other guy to a duel. Because nothing says rational response like pistols at dawn, right? The worst part wasn't just the cheating. It was watching this lonely, eccentric man desperately fight for someone who clearly didn't deserve his devotion. Carol promised it would never happen again, but we all knew that was complete garbage. Adam deserved so much better than a woman who treated his heart like a revolving door. Moving on to Angela, Peter's former boss at the toy company. Unlike most characters who simply disappear without explanation, Angela got a proper send-off that hit viewers right in the feels. When voice actress Carrie Fisher passed away in real life, the show made the touching decision to address it directly in the series. According to Peter's explanation, Angela died doing what she loved, which was apparently swimming less than 20 minutes after eating. Now, we all know that's an old wives' tale about getting cramps, but in the Family Guy universe, it was enough to send this strong, independent businesswoman to her watery grave. It's both absurd and oddly respectful, which perfectly captures the show's ability to blend humor with genuine emotion. Barbara Pewterschmidt, or Babs as she's known to friends, has endured decades of her husband Carter's wandering eye. This woman has put up with more infidelity than a reality TV show contestant, and somehow she keeps forgiving him. The breaking point came when Peter caught Carter in bed with yet another woman, and after some classic Griffin family blackmail shenanigans, the secret inevitably came out. Picture the devastation on Babs's face when she realized that everyone knew about her husband's latest affair before she did. The humiliation of being the last to know, the embarrassment of having your private pain become public gossip. It's enough to break anyone's spirit. She kicked his crusty behind out of the house and tried to start fresh, but love makes fools of us all, and she eventually took him back. The irony is that Babs isn't exactly innocent herself. She's had her own affairs over the years, including that memorable encounter with Jackie Gleason. But there's something particularly cruel about Carter's public humiliation of his wife that makes this betrayal sting more than the others. Bonnie Swanson represents the dark side of suburban marriage. When she's not cheating on her paralyzed husband, she's literally trying to murder him with ground glass in his food, or buying rickety houses hoping they'll collapse on him. But karma has a way of coming full circle, and Bonnie got a taste of her own medicine in the most humiliating way possible. During their daughter's birthday party, with friends and family gathered around, Bonnie overheard Joe having an affair with a colleague through the baby monitor. Imagine the mortification of discovering your spouse's betrayal while surrounded by people who are supposed to be celebrating your family. The timing couldn't have been worse, and the method of discovery was like something out of a soap opera nightmare. The fact that this happened during what should have been a joyous occasion for their child makes it even more devastating. Bonnie may be a serial cheater herself, but nobody deserves to have their private pain exposed in such a public and humiliating way. Now let's talk about Brian Griffin, the philosophical dog with more emotional baggage than a therapy convention. Poor Brian has endured countless injuries over the years, from losing his teeth in a fight with Peter to getting his face smashed by a fire hydrant. But the absolute worst thing that happened to him was his temporary death in season 12. Getting hit by that car and actually dying, even if it was only for 2 episodes, represents the ultimate trauma for any character. Death is supposed to be permanent, final, the end of all stories. For Brian to experience that ultimate fear and then somehow return to life, the psychological impact must have been enormous. Think about it from his perspective. One moment he's crossing the street, the next he's presumably facing whatever comes after life. Then suddenly he's back, but with the knowledge that death is real, permanent, and can happen at any moment. That kind of existential trauma would mess with anyone's head, even a talking dog who writes pretentious novels. Bruce's story is one of love, acceptance, and heartbreaking loss. After years of hiding his true self, he finally came out, married his longtime partner Jeffrey, and even had a baby through surrogacy. For the first time in his life, Bruce was living authentically, openly, and happily. He had everything he'd ever wanted: a husband, a child, and the freedom to be himself without shame or fear. But Family Guy has never been kind to happiness, and during what should have been a perfect vacation in Bermuda, tragedy struck in the most brutal way imaginable. Jeffrey's hat fell into the water, and being the loving husband he was, he jumped in to retrieve it. That simple act of devotion cost him his life when a shark attacked and killed him in front of Bruce's horrified eyes. The imagery of watching Jeffrey get torn apart by a predator, followed by the soul-crushing sight of 2 coffins being loaded onto the plane, represents a level of trauma that goes beyond physical pain. Bruce had to watch his dreams of a perfect life literally get devoured before his eyes. Carter Pewterschmidt is arguably one of the most evil characters on the show. This billionaire has hidden cancer cures for profit, destroyed countless lives for money, and shown no remorse for any of his actions. But karma caught up with him in the most ironic way possible when Lois accidentally shot him in the head. The bullet caused severe brain damage that completely changed Carter's personality. Suddenly, this cruel capitalist became kind, generous, and caring. He wanted to give away all his money to charity and live a life of compassion instead of greed. For the first time ever, Carter was actually happy and at peace with himself. But Barbara couldn't stand the thought of losing their fortune, so she shot him in the head again, reversing the brain damage and bringing back the cruel version of her husband. The tragedy isn't just that Carter got shot twice by his own family. It's that he briefly experienced what it felt like to be a good person, only to have that stolen away from him. Chris Griffin's worst moment doesn't involve getting turned into sausage or any of the other bizarre things that happen to him regularly. No. His darkest hour came when the Griffin house caught fire and Herbert the creepy neighbor rushed in to supposedly save him. For a brief moment, it looked like Herbert might actually be a hero, but instead of carrying Chris to safety, he took him straight back to his own house. The most disturbing part wasn't even Herbert's actions. It was his family's complete lack of concern. When they discovered what happened, their reaction was basically that Herbert had earned the right to kidnap Chris. The casual acceptance of what was clearly an inappropriate situation shows just how little Chris's family actually cares about his well-being. Cleveland Brown has endured countless humiliations over the years, from his bathtub crashing through his house repeatedly to various other physical mishaps. But the absolute worst thing that happened to him was being betrayed by one of his closest friends in the most heinous way imaginable. Joe Swanson tricked Cleveland into going to what he thought was a vacation in Florida, but was actually a retirement home run by seniors who harvest organs from unsuspecting victims. Joe wanted Peter's legs for himself, but when that plan fell through, he sent Cleveland as a substitute without warning him about the danger. Imagine discovering that someone you trusted with your life had essentially sold you out to organ harvesters. Cleveland literally lost his legs because Joe was too selfish to give up his twisted scheme. The betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound because it came from someone he considered family. The mystery of Cleveland Jr. represents one of the show's darkest, unsolved cases. The original Cleveland Jr. was energetic, slim, and full of life. But suddenly, without explanation, he was replaced by a completely different person who was overweight, slow, and bore no resemblance to the original character. The official explanation is that the original was replaced by a secret agent, but what actually happened to the real Cleveland Jr. remains unknown. The implications are terrifying. Is he dead? Is he being held captive somewhere? Has he been brainwashed? The uncertainty is almost worse than knowing the truth would be. This represents every parent's worst nightmare, having their child disappear and replaced by an imposter while everyone else pretends nothing happened. Cleveland doesn't even seem to notice or care that his son is completely different, which adds another layer of tragedy to the situation. Consuela works harder than anyone else in Quahog, fighting for her fellow maids while cleaning houses for multiple families and even Superman. But her dedication to helping others led her to work for James Woods, a decision she would come to regret in the most horrific way possible. In one of the show's darkest moments, Consuela revealed that Woods had assaulted her nephew, who later took his own life as a result of the trauma. This single line of dialogue carries more weight than entire episodes of physical comedy. It's a reminder that behind the jokes and gags, these characters have real pain and real trauma. The fact that Consuela continued working and fighting for others despite carrying this enormous burden speaks to her incredible strength. But nobody should have to endure such a devastating loss, especially when it could have been prevented. Death himself, the actual Grim Reaper, experienced his own form of mortality when he twisted his ankle while chasing Peter. Suddenly, the being responsible for all death on Earth was sidelined by a simple injury. Without Death able to do his job, chaos erupted as accidents piled up with no consequences. Being forced to hand over his powers to Peter Griffin, of all people, must have been absolutely humiliating for such a powerful entity. Imagine being rendered helpless by something as mundane as a twisted ankle when you're supposed to be one of the most feared forces in the universe. The irony of Death being unable to die from his own injury while watching Peter bungle the most important job in existence must have been torture. Sometimes the worst pain isn't physical. It's watching someone else destroy everything you've worked for. Diane Simmons's downfall began when she discovered she was being replaced by a younger news anchor. After dedicating her life to journalism, the industry she loved was throwing her away like yesterday's newspaper. The rejection and humiliation drove her to madness, leading to a killing spree at James Woods' mansion party. Her plan to frame Tom Tucker and reclaim her career was as desperate as it was violent. But when it all fell apart and she was about to kill Lois, Stewie ended her reign of terror with a single shot. Going from respected journalist to murderous villain to corpse in a matter of hours represents a complete life collapse that few characters have experienced. Dr. Hartman's medical incompetence is legendary, but the one time he actually did his job correctly, it ruined his career. During a routine prostate exam on Peter, he performed the procedure exactly as he was supposed to, but Peter's ignorance and embarrassment led to false assault charges that cost Hartman his medical license. The injustice of losing his livelihood for doing his job properly must have been devastating for someone who, despite his flaws, genuinely wants to help people. Being dragged through court and having his reputation destroyed over a misunderstanding shows how quickly a life can be ruined by ignorance and fear. When Peter later needed the same procedure and had to crawl back to the doctor he destroyed, the humiliation was complete. Hartman eventually got his license back, but the damage to his reputation and the trauma of the legal battle left permanent scars. Ernie the giant chicken has survived countless brutal fights with Peter over the years, but his battle with Meg might have been his last. When Meg moved in with her boyfriend's family and Ernie insulted Peter, she stood up for her father in the most violent way possible. Despite all the abuse Peter has heaped on her over the years, Meg's loyalty to her family ran deep enough that she couldn't stand hearing someone else trash-talk him. Her brutal decapitation of Ernie was both shocking and oddly touching, showing that family bonds can survive even the worst treatment. The sight of Ernie's headless body running around in front of his horrified family was disturbing, even by Family Guy standards. The fact that we didn't get the usual close-up of his eyes suggests this might have been his final defeat, making Meg the one person who could do what Peter never could. The evil monkey's story is actually quite sad when you think about it. For years he terrorized Chris by angrily pointing at him from the closet, but it turns out he was just too shy to start a conversation. All that time, he wasn't evil at all, just socially awkward and misunderstood. But before this revelation, the poor monkey was beaten up by Brian's son Dylan. Being attacked by someone when you're already struggling with social anxiety and communication issues must have been incredibly traumatic. The monkey was already isolated and afraid, and the violence only made things worse. Glenn Quagmire's entire identity revolves around his sexual prowess and his most prized anatomical feature. So when a shark bit off his manhood during a skiing trip, it represented the ultimate nightmare for someone whose whole personality is built around sexual conquest. Watching Quagmire become a shell of himself, miserable and lost without the one thing that defined him, was both comedic and genuinely sad. His entire sense of self-worth was tied to something that could be taken away in an instant, showing how fragile our identities really are. The solution, getting Ida's old equipment with a huge mole on it, was both generous and awkward. Having to explain to potential partners that you're using your father's former anatomy would be enough to give anyone performance anxiety for life. The greased-up deaf guy remained a mystery for years, slipping away from every attempt to catch him while spouting his signature catchphrase. But his origin story revealed a tragic accident that changed him from an ordinary businessman into the greasy enigma we know today. Getting caught in a grease truck explosion severe enough to cause deafness and require constant lubrication to survive sounds absolutely horrifying. Imagine going from a normal life to being a permanently slippery outcast who can't hear and can barely communicate with others. The transformation from respected professional to neighborhood oddity represents a complete loss of identity and social connection. He went from being someone people respected to someone they actively tried to avoid or capture. Herbert's backstory adds a dark historical element to his character. As a World War II pilot who was shot down and sent to a concentration camp, he experienced some of humanity's darkest hours. Being forced to do degrading work like sorting recyclables while imprisoned shows how war can strip away dignity and humanity. The fact that he describes the sticky trash as the worst part, while clearly downplaying much more serious trauma, suggests a coping mechanism of focusing on minor irritations to avoid confronting deeper pain. His current inappropriate behavior toward Chris might stem from the psychological damage of his wartime experiences. Ida's journey represents the struggle of living authentically while facing rejection from those you love most. When she came out as transgender to her son Quagmire, instead of receiving support, she was shunned and rejected. Being abandoned by your own child for being true to yourself is one of the cruelest forms of emotional pain. Even after Quagmire eventually accepted her, he later forced her to choose between him and her relationship with Brian. Making someone pick between their child and their chance at happiness is pure selfishness, especially after she had already made the generous gesture of giving him her former anatomy. Joe Swanson's transformation from paraplegic to quadriplegic during a bull run represents every disabled person's worst fear, losing even more independence and control over their life. Being paralyzed from the neck down instead of just the waist changed everything for him. The abandonment that followed was even worse than the physical trauma. His wife Bonnie immediately left him for Europe, claiming she didn't sign up for this level of care. His friends tried to help, but eventually dumped him in a terrible state facility when it became too much work. Being betrayed by both your spouse and your closest friends when you need them most is a special kind of hell. Joe eventually regained some function, but the emotional scars of abandonment would last forever. Jerome carries the heaviest emotional burden of any character on the show. Losing his wife to cancer just 1 week after their wedding, followed by his daughter's death from pneumonia 6 weeks later, represents a level of tragedy that transcends comedy. Even in a cartoon universe where death and destruction happen regularly, Jerome's story stands out as genuinely heartbreaking. The timing of these losses, coming right after what should have been the happiest moments of his life, makes the tragedy even more poignant. Jillian's happiness was shattered when Diane Simmons murdered her husband Derek during her killing spree. After being jerked around by Brian and finally finding a good man to marry, having that torn away by random violence must have been devastating. The look of absolute devastation on her face when she realized her husband was dead spoke volumes about the depth of her loss. Going from newlywed bliss to widow in a matter of moments represents the kind of trauma that changes someone forever. The Kool-Aid Man, despite being a corporate mascot, became a victim of Stewie's evil twin in one of the show's more surreal moments. Having your glass body smashed and your contents consumed by a psychotic baby represents a uniquely cartoonish form of murder. The fact that he returned later suggests some form of immortality, but the experience of being destroyed and consumed must have been traumatic even for a sentient beverage container. Lois Griffin has endured tremendous physical and emotional trauma over the years. While getting killed by Stewie in a simulation doesn't count as real, her other experiences are genuinely horrific. Getting boiling oil thrown on her by Peter left her with severe burns covering her entire body. But arguably worse was the mental trauma of watching Peter perform oral acts on her sick mother due to a hypnotherapy mishap. Physical burns heal, but that mental image would haunt her forever. The violation of boundaries and the grotesque nature of the incident make it worse than any physical injury. Loretta Brown's death was both tragic and disturbing. Falling to her death when Peter destroyed her house was bad enough, but Quagmire's necrophilic intentions afterward added another layer of horror to her fate. Being killed by your ex-husband's friend's stupidity and then having your corpse violated represents a complete denial of dignity, even in death. The fact that this was played for laughs makes it even more disturbing. Meg Griffin has endured so much abuse that choosing just one worst moment seems impossible. She's been shot, stabbed, humiliated, and ignored by her family for years. But losing her arms and legs while becoming deaf, dumb, and blind represents the ultimate disability nightmare. Being completely helpless and unable to communicate or care for yourself while still being conscious and aware would be torture beyond imagination. The combination of physical disability and sensory deprivation creates a prison worse than any jail cell. Mort Goldman's loss of his wife Muriel was made even more tragic by his inability to think of anything positive to say about their marriage. After decades together, being unable to recall a single happy memory suggests a relationship built on obligation rather than love. The fact that she died violently during Diane's killing spree adds sudden trauma to what might have otherwise been a natural parting. Having your spouse murdered while you're realizing your marriage was empty creates a complex grief that would be hard to process. Neil Goldman's humiliation when Meg kissed him during a crisis was compounded by his own poor judgment in broadcasting the moment publicly. Instead of treasuring a private moment, he turned it into a public spectacle that embarrassed them both. His subsequent suicide attempt showed how deeply the rejection affected him, but his actions had already ruined any chance he might have had with Meg. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are consequences of our own poor choices. Peter Griffin has caused enormous destruction throughout the series, but he's also been on the receiving end of significant trauma. Learning that his father figure wasn't his biological father created an identity crisis that shook his understanding of who he was. The existential pain of questioning your entire life story and family history cuts deeper than any physical injury. Peter's struggle to understand his place in the world after this revelation showed a vulnerability that's rare for his character. Seamus represents the ultimate survivor, having lost most of his body parts to various predators over the years. Whether it was James Woods, sharks, or other creatures, the systematic loss of limbs and organs while somehow remaining alive and conscious is a nightmare beyond comprehension. The fact that his origin story keeps changing suggests that the trauma was so severe, he can't even remember it clearly. Living as mostly wood and prosthetics while maintaining consciousness would be a constant reminder of everything he's lost. Stewie Griffin has endured incredible trauma for a 1-year-old baby. From dingo attacks to being fused with his teddy bear, his young life has been filled with horror. But the worst incident was when he split his head open falling downstairs, and his family refused to get him medical attention. Instead of rushing him to the hospital, they tried to cover up the injury and hide the evidence. Watching a raccoon gnaw on his exposed brain, while his family worried more about getting in trouble than his health, shows a level of neglect that borders on criminal. The fact that he spent months in a coma while they continued to prioritize their own convenience over his life demonstrates how little they truly care about him despite their occasional shows of affection. Tom Tucker's identity crisis when he faced replacement by a younger anchor led to a complete career meltdown. Following Peter's advice to get tattoos live on air was the final nail in his professional coffin, destroying everything he'd worked for his entire life. Being fired from the job that defined him and then nearly committing suicide over the loss shows how completely his sense of self was tied to his career. The humiliation of having his replacement want to interview him before his suicide attempt added insult to injury. Trisha Takanawa's fate during the Y2K apocalypse episode, becoming a victim of cannibalism, represents the ultimate objectification. Being reduced to literal food for other people strips away every aspect of humanity and dignity. Even in a post-apocalyptic setting, the casual way her consumption was discussed shows how completely society had broken down and how little value was placed on individual human life. Each of these characters has faced their own unique form of suffering, from physical trauma to emotional devastation to existential crisis. What makes these moments particularly impactful is how they contrast with the show's usual comedic tone. When Family Guy decides to get dark, it doesn't hold back. These aren't just random gags or throwaway jokes. They're genuine character moments that reveal the psychological depth hiding beneath the surface humor. The fact that these characters continue to function and interact normally after experiencing such trauma speaks to both human resilience and the show's commitment to treating serious subjects with the same casual attitude as everything else. Understanding these worst moments helps us appreciate the full scope of what these characters have endured. It's easy to laugh at their misfortunes when they're presented as comedy, but examining them seriously reveals a tapestry of human suffering that would challenge anyone's sanity. The genius of Family Guy lies in its ability to make us laugh at things that would horrify us in real life. By presenting extreme trauma in a comedic context, the show allows us to process difficult emotions and experiences in a safe environment. These characters serve as vessels for our own fears and anxieties, experiencing the worst possible outcomes so we don't have to. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering provides a strange form of comfort and inspiration. Whether it's betrayal by loved ones, physical mutilation, loss of identity, or complete abandonment, every character has faced their ultimate nightmare and somehow survived to appear in the next episode. The cyclical nature of their suffering, where trauma is quickly forgotten and life returns to normal, reflects how we often deal with our own pain by compartmentalizing and moving forward rather than dwelling on past hurts. But tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you can take comfort in knowing that no matter how bad your day was, at least you're not a Family Guy character. At least you don't have to worry about your house being destroyed by a giant chicken, your spouse cheating with your neighbor, or your family refusing to take you to the hospital when your brain is exposed. Sweet dreams, and remember that in the morning, you'll wake up in a world that's probably a little less chaotic than Quahog, Rhode Island. Though given the state of things these days, that might not be as comforting as it used to be. But hey, that's a worry for tomorrow. Tonight, just let the absurd suffering of animated characters lull you into peaceful slumber, secure in the knowledge that your problems are probably more manageable than theirs. Sleep tight, and don't let the evil monkeys point at you from the closet.
Hey there, night owls and Family Guy fanatics. Before you drift off to dreamland, let me take you on a journey through the twisted world of Quahog and its unforgettable residents. Tonight we're diving deep into the most beloved and despised characters from Seth MacFarlane's animated masterpiece. So grab your favorite pillow, get comfortable, and let's explore the wild personalities that have kept us laughing and cringing for over 2 decades. Picture this: a small Rhode Island town where a talking baby plots world domination. A paralyzed cop remains the voice of reason, and a dog walks upright while nursing his literary pretensions. This is the bizarre universe of Family Guy, where moral compasses spin wildly and character development takes unexpected turns. Some residents of Quahog have captured our hearts with their quirky charm, while others have become the targets of fan frustration and outright hatred. What makes a Family Guy character lovable versus loathsome? Is it their moral fiber, their comedic timing, or simply how much chaos they create? As we journey through this character analysis, you'll discover why certain personalities have endured as fan favorites, while others have fallen from grace, becoming symbols of everything wrong with the show's direction. Let's begin our exploration with Joe Swanson, a character who stands out like a beacon of decency in an ocean of dysfunction. In a show filled with morally questionable individuals, Joe represents something genuinely admirable: Despite being confined to a wheelchair, he never allows his disability to define his worth or limit his capabilities as a police officer. His determination and positive attitude shine through even in the darkest episodes. What makes Joe so endearing is his refusal to play the victim. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, he embraces his condition with humor and grace. The self-deprecating jokes about his wheelchair become running gags that work precisely because Joe himself doesn't view his disability as a weakness. He's shown time and again that physical limitations cannot diminish his strength, courage, or effectiveness as both an officer and a friend. Remember that powerful episode where Joe temporarily regained the use of his legs? The transformation was startling. Power corrupted him almost instantly, turning our beloved reasonable Joe into an insufferable, cocky version of himself. It took his friends literally breaking his legs again to restore the Joe we knew and loved. This storyline brilliantly demonstrated that Joe's wheelchair wasn't a limitation, but rather an integral part of what made him special. Joe's genuine kindness shines through in his interactions with others, particularly in how he handles Meg's crush on him. Rather than humiliating her or making the situation awkward, he lets her down gently, showing the consideration and maturity that separates him from his less evolved friends. His relationship with Bonnie may have its challenges, but Joe consistently approaches their problems with patience and understanding. The contrast becomes stark when we examine Chris Griffin, who represents the opposite end of the likability spectrum. Chris has undergone one of the most disappointing character transformations in the series. What began as an awkward but relatably sweet teenager has devolved into something far more disturbing. His evolution from lovable oddball to creepy, perverted dunce has left many fans wondering what happened to the Chris they once enjoyed. Early Chris possessed an innocent goofiness that made his mistakes forgivable. He was weird, sure, but in an endearing way that reminded viewers of their own awkward teenage years. However, as seasons progressed, the writers seemed to drain all charm from his character, replacing it with increasingly disturbing behavior patterns that mirror his father's worst traits without any of the redeeming humor. The breaking point for many fans came during this episode where Chris's response to bullying involved kidnapping Stewie and locking him in a backpack. This wasn't just stupid or misguided. It revealed a genuinely sociopathic streak that made him irredeemably unlikable. His willingness to exploit and harm others for personal gain became a recurring theme that alienated viewers who had once rooted for him. Chris's artistic talents offered glimpses of potential depth, but the writers consistently chose to ignore these opportunities in favor of cheap, gross-out humor. Instead of developing his creative side, they reduced him to a walking masturbation joke, with no growth, no development, and no apparent purpose beyond making audiences uncomfortable. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we find Adam West, the delightfully unhinged mayor of Quahog. West represents everything wonderful about Family Guy's absurdist humor. His complete disconnection from reality, combined with his earnest delivery of utterly ridiculous statements, creates comedy gold that never feels forced or artificial. What makes Mayor West so beloved is his authentic insanity. Unlike other characters whose crazy behavior feels calculated or mean-spirited, West's lunacy comes from a place of genuine confusion about how the world works. His attempts to gain superpowers by visiting toxic waste dumps or his confusion about basic concepts like public transportation create moments of pure comedic brilliance. The beauty of Adam West lies in his unpredictability. You never know what bizarre tangent his mind will take next, but you can be certain it will be hilarious. His complete lack of self-awareness, combined with his position of authority, creates endless opportunities for absurd situations that showcase the show's willingness to embrace complete nonsense in service of comedy. West's corruption stems not from malice or greed, but from his fundamental inability to understand basic concepts. This makes him simultaneously dangerous and endearing, a combination that few characters can pull off successfully. His random policy decisions and bizarre public appearances never fail to entertain, making him a consistent bright spot in the series. Bonnie Swanson presents a more complex case study in character likability. While Joe represents the best of humanity despite his physical challenges, Bonnie embodies frustration and resentment that many viewers find insufferable. Her constant complaints about her marriage feel particularly grating given her apparent unwillingness to actually address her supposed problems. Bonnie's role as the perpetual martyr becomes tiresome quickly. She acts as though caring for Joe is some unbearable burden, despite the fact that their relationship appears mutually beneficial. Her dependency on him contradicts her complaints about him, creating a character who seems more interested in generating sympathy than actually improving her situation. Her parenting, or lack thereof, presents another source of frustration. Bonnie shows minimal interest in her children, appearing detached and disengaged from their lives. This emotional distance, combined with her holier-than-thou attitude, creates a character who feels hypocritical and unlikable. Her affair with Brian further emphasizes her lack of respect for Joe, despite his obvious devotion to their family. The contrast between Bonnie and Joe highlights why Joe remains beloved, while Bonnie generates irritation. Joe faces genuine challenges with grace and humor, while Bonnie creates drama from relatively minor inconveniences. Her constant negativity and victim mentality make her one of the show's least sympathetic characters. Meg Griffin occupies a unique position in the Family Guy universe as the ultimate underdog. Her status as the family scapegoat has created an interesting dynamic where her suffering becomes a source of both comedy and sympathy. Many fans find themselves rooting for Meg precisely because she endures so much abuse from those around her. What makes Meg's character work is the exaggerated nature of her mistreatment. The abuse is so over-the-top and ridiculous that it loops back into comedy territory. Her family's treatment of her is so absurdly unfair that it becomes funny rather than genuinely disturbing. This delicate balance allows viewers to laugh at her situation while still feeling sympathy for her plight. Meg's occasional moments of strength and rebellion provide satisfying payoffs for viewers who have watched her suffer. When she finally stands up to her family or demonstrates hidden talents, these scenes feel earned and gratifying. Her brief stint in prison, where she became tough and confident, showed glimpses of what she could be if freed from her family's oppression. The character's potential remains largely untapped, which adds to her appeal. Meg possesses intelligence, artistic ability, and hidden depths that rarely get explored. This untapped potential makes her feel more human and relatable than many of her more cartoonish family members. Her moments of genuine emotion and vulnerability create connections with viewers who see themselves in her struggles. Doug represents everything wrong with Family Guy's approach to rivalry characters. Introduced as Stewie's nemesis, Doug never lived up to his intended role as a worthy adversary. Instead, he became a repetitive annoyance that frustrated both Stewie and the audience. His upper-class smugness and apparent invincibility made him feel like a cheap plot device rather than a genuine character. The fundamental problem with Doug was his lack of interesting qualities. He wasn't clever enough to match Stewie intellectually, funny enough to be entertaining, or threatening enough to feel dangerous. He was simply there, taking up screen time that could have been better used developing existing characters or introducing more compelling new ones. Stewie's inability to defeat Doug felt wrong for his character. The genius baby, who builds time machines and death rays, should not be consistently outsmarted by a slightly privileged toddler. This dynamic undermined Stewie's established competence and made their conflicts feel artificial and frustrating. The writer's decision to unceremoniously kill Doug off-screen felt like an admission of failure. Rather than providing closure to his storylines or giving him a memorable exit, they simply erased him from the show, leaving viewers with no payoff for the time they had invested in his conflicts with Stewie. Carter Pewterschmidt succeeds where Doug fails by embracing his role as an entertaining antagonist. As Lois's father and Peter's nemesis, Carter embodies every negative stereotype about wealthy elites while remaining genuinely funny. His complete disconnection from normal life, combined with his ruthless business practices, creates a character who is simultaneously despicable and hilarious. Carter's disdain for Peter provides some of the show's best ongoing comedy. His barely concealed contempt for his son-in-law, combined with his obvious belief that Lois deserves better, creates tension that translates into laughs. The fact that he's not entirely wrong about Peter's shortcomings adds depth to their antagonistic relationship. What makes Carter entertaining, rather than annoying, is his honesty about his awfulness. He never pretends to be a good person or tries to justify his selfish behavior. His brutal honesty about his motivations and his complete lack of self-awareness create comedy that feels authentic to his character. He knows exactly what he likes and uses his wealth to get it. Consequences be damned. Carter's capitalism, taken to absurd extremes, provides commentary on wealth inequality while remaining funny. His casual dismissal of poor people's problems and his genuine confusion about how normal people live create moments that are both satirical and comedic. He represents everything wrong with the ultra-wealthy, while being entertaining enough that viewers enjoy watching him. Herbert the Pervert represents one of Family Guy's most controversial characters. While some viewers find his antics mildly amusing, many fans consider him genuinely disturbing rather than funny. His entire character revolves around inappropriate behavior toward children, which crosses lines that many viewers find uncomfortable. The problem with Herbert lies in his one-note nature. Unlike other problematic characters who possess redeeming qualities or interesting depths, Herbert exists solely to make inappropriate jokes about children. This limited scope makes him feel more like a running gag that has overstayed its welcome rather than a fully developed character. Herbert's voice and mannerisms, while distinctive, quickly become grating rather than endearing. His appearances often feel forced, as though the writers are including him simply because he exists rather than because he serves any narrative purpose. This makes his scenes feel like interruptions rather than integral parts of episodes. The character's uncomfortable implications make many viewers question whether his inclusion is worth the potential laughs. While Family Guy has always pushed boundaries, Herbert's particular brand of humor feels more creepy than clever, leading many fans to wish he would simply disappear from the show entirely. Quagmire presents one of the most complex cases in Family Guy character analysis. His status as a perverted neighbor should make him completely unlikable, yet he maintains a dedicated fan base who appreciate his role in the show's dynamic. His relationships with women are deeply problematic, but his character possesses enough depth and humor to keep many viewers entertained. What saves Quagmire from complete condemnation is his occasional display of genuine care and loyalty. His protection of his sister Brenda and his willingness to stand up to her abusive boyfriend showed a side of him that transcended his usual selfish behavior. These moments of heroism provide glimpses of decency beneath his problematic exterior. Quagmire's rivalry with Brian offers some of the series' most memorable confrontations. His brutal takedown of Brian's hypocrisy during their dinner argument became an instant classic moment that many fans still quote. His ability to see through Brian's pretentious facade and call him out directly resonated with viewers who had grown tired of Brian's self-righteousness. The character's backstory adds layers that make him more than just a one-dimensional pervert. His complicated relationship with his father Ida and his genuine care for his cats reveal aspects of his personality that contradict his surface-level characterization. These contradictions make him feel more human and complex than many other characters. Brian Griffin represents perhaps the most dramatic fall from grace in Family Guy history. Once beloved as the voice of reason and moral center of the Griffin family, Brian has transformed into one of the show's most insufferable characters. His evolution from lovable family pet to pretentious hypocrite has alienated many longtime fans. Early Brian possessed integrity and intelligence that made him a compelling character. His refusal to cheat on exams and his genuine concern for his family's well-being established him as someone worth rooting for. However, as seasons progressed, his worst traits became more pronounced, while his positive qualities faded into memory. Brian's literary pretensions have become a source of endless frustration for viewers. His constant references to his unfinished novel and his pseudo-intellectual posturing feel tired and repetitive. His tendency to break up with women for being smarter than him reveals the shallow nature of his supposed intellectualism. The character's selfishness has reached levels that make him genuinely unlikable. His refusal to wear a flea collar despite infesting his entire family, his exploitation of Stewie's kindness, and his terrible treatment of his son Dylan paint a picture of someone who cares only about himself. His death and subsequent resurrection felt like missed opportunities to either give him meaningful character growth or replace him permanently. Brian's romantic relationships showcase his hypocrisy most clearly. He complains about only dating unintelligent women while actively seeking out such relationships. His inability to maintain connections with educated, accomplished women reveals his own insecurities and shallow nature. His treatment of women ranges from dismissive to actively harmful. Stewie Griffin stands as Family Guy's greatest character success story. His evolution from one-dimensional evil baby to complex, witty, and emotionally engaging character represents the best of what the show can achieve when it focuses on character development. His journey from would-be world conqueror to beloved family member has been genuinely compelling to watch. What makes Stewie so endearing is his combination of childish wonder and adult sophistication. His advanced vocabulary and complex schemes contrast beautifully with his genuine need for love and acceptance. This duality creates comedy that feels both intelligent and heartfelt, a rare combination in the Family Guy universe. Stewie's relationship with Brian, despite Brian's recent character deterioration, has provided some of the series' most memorable and touching moments. Their adventures together showcase both characters at their best, with Stewie's loyalty and Brian's companionship creating genuine emotional connections. Stewie's efforts to save Brian's life demonstrated the depth of their bond. The character's growth from villain to anti-hero to beloved family member has felt natural and earned. His evil schemes have become more playful than threatening, while his capacity for kindness and loyalty has expanded. His interactions with Rupert reveal his childlike side, while his inventions showcase his genius-level intellect. Stewie's humor has evolved to become more sophisticated and character-driven, rather than relying solely on shock value. His sarcastic observations and witty comebacks feel authentic to his personality while providing consistent laughs. His ability to break the fourth wall and comment on the show itself adds meta-humor that longtime fans appreciate. Lois Griffin presents a fascinating case study in character likability, or rather, the lack thereof. While she appears to be the moral center of the Griffin family, closer examination reveals her to be just as flawed and problematic as the relatives she criticizes. Her hypocrisy and manipulative behavior have made her increasingly unpopular with fans over time. Lois's biggest problem is her tendency to present herself as morally superior while engaging in behavior that contradicts her stated values. She criticizes others for infidelity while having multiple affairs. Herself, she plays the concerned mother while neglecting her children's actual needs. This disconnect between her self-image and her actions creates a character who feels dishonest and frustrating. Her treatment of Meg represents some of her worst behavior. While Peter's abuse of Meg is overt and cartoonish, Lois's neglect and emotional manipulation feel more realistic and therefore more disturbing. Her tendency to gaslight Meg and play the victim when confronted about her parenting failures reveals a calculating side to her personality. Lois's violent tendencies, particularly after learning martial arts, showcase her capacity for genuine cruelty. Her attacks on innocent people and her aggressive behavior toward service workers reveal someone with serious anger management issues. The fact that she blames Peter for her violent outbursts demonstrates her unwillingness to take responsibility for her own actions. Her relationship with Peter, while central to the show, often feels more like mutual exploitation than genuine love. Both characters use each other for their own purposes, with Lois frequently manipulating Peter's stupidity to get her way. This dynamic makes their marriage feel hollow and transactional, rather than romantic or meaningful. Dr. Hartman provides comic relief through his spectacular medical incompetence. His complete cluelessness about basic medical procedures creates absurd situations that highlight the show's willingness to embrace complete nonsense for comedic effect. His survival in his profession defies all logic, which makes him perfect for Family Guy's reality. What makes Dr. Hartman endearing despite his obvious malpractice is his earnest delivery of completely wrong information. He never seems aware of his incompetence, approaching each medical crisis with unwarranted confidence. This combination of ignorance and enthusiasm creates comedy that feels lighthearted rather than mean-spirited. His interactions with patients and their families provide opportunities for misunderstandings that showcase the show's love of absurdist humor. His tendency to deliver completely irrelevant information with the same seriousness as actual medical advice creates confusion that translates into laughs. Dr. Hartman's continued employment at Quahog Hospital raises questions about the town's medical oversight, but viewers have learned to embrace such logical inconsistencies as part of Family Guy's charm. His presence provides reliable comedy without requiring complex character development or emotional investment. Peter Griffin occupies the uncomfortable position of being both the show's protagonist and arguably its most hateable character. His journey from lovable oaf to genuinely problematic individual has paralleled many fans' growing frustration with the series' direction. His behavior has become increasingly cruel and selfish, making him difficult to root for or even tolerate. Peter's treatment of his family represents his worst qualities. His abuse of Meg goes far beyond typical sibling rivalry or parental discipline, crossing into territory that feels genuinely disturbing. His physical violence toward his children and wife, while played for laughs, creates uncomfortable viewing for many fans. His friendship with Joe, Cleveland, and Quagmire often brings out his most selfish instincts. His encouragement of Joe's infidelity and his general disregard for his friend's well-being shows someone who views relationships as sources of entertainment rather than genuine connections. His inability to support others during difficult times reveals his fundamental self-centeredness. Peter's lack of growth or learning represents one of the show's biggest weaknesses. Despite facing consequences for his actions, he never develops genuine understanding or changes his behavior patterns. This static character development makes him feel less like a person and more like a collection of negative traits, designed to drive plot points. His role as father figure is particularly problematic, as his children are forced to navigate their development despite, rather than because, of his influence. His failure to provide guidance, support, or even basic safety for his family makes him one of television's worst fictional parents. The evolution of these characters reflects Family Guy's own journey as a series. Early seasons balanced outrageous humor with genuine character moments that made viewers care about these flawed individuals. As time progressed, the show's emphasis shifted toward shock value and repetitive gags at the expense of character development. Some characters, like Stewie and Joe, have maintained their appeal through consistent characterization and occasional growth. Others, like Brian and Chris, have suffered from writers who seemed more interested in exploiting their worst traits than exploring their potential for development. Still, others, like Peter and Lois, have become Annie-Edie, increasingly unlikable as their negative qualities have been amplified without corresponding positive growth. The most beloved Family Guy characters tend to possess self-awareness about their flaws or demonstrate genuine care for others despite their problems. Joe's kindness, Stewie's loyalty, and even Carter's honesty about his selfishness make them more palatable than characters who lack these redeeming qualities. Conversely, the most hated characters often combine terrible behavior with hypocrisy or complete lack of self-reflection. Brian's pretentiousness, Lois's manipulation, and Peter's cruelty become harder to tolerate when the characters themselves seem unaware of or indifferent to their impact on others. The show's treatment of these characters also influences fan perception. Characters who face consequences for their actions or show occasional vulnerability tend to maintain viewer sympathy longer than those who seem invulnerable to the effects of their behavior. The parenter, writers' willingness to explore character depths versus relying on surface-level gags, often determines whether characters remain fresh or become stale. Family Guy's character dynamics work best when they balance outrageous behavior with moments of genuine humanity. The show's finest episodes often feature characters stepping outside their established roles to reveal hidden depths or unexpected kindness. These moments remind viewers why they became invested in these characters originally. As you settle into sleep tonight, consider how these complex personalities have evolved over more than 20 years of television. Some have grown into beloved icons of animated comedy, while others have become cautionary tales about the importance of character development and consistency. The residents of Quahog continue to entertain, frustrate, and surprise audiences with their unpredictable antics. Whether you love them or hate them, these characters have become integral parts of popular culture, inspiring countless discussions, debates, and analyses like this one. Sweet dreams, and may your subconscious sort through the chaos of Family Guy's character landscape as peacefully as possible. Tomorrow brings new episodes, new controversies, and new opportunities to debate the merits and flaws of Seth MacFarlane's animated creation. Hey there, night owls and Family Guy fanatics. If you're scrolling through YouTube at 3 in the morning looking for something to help you drift off to dreamland, you've stumbled upon the perfect video. Tonight we're diving deep into the bizarre, hilarious, and sometimes completely unhinged world of Family Guy with some truly wild facts that'll either lull you to sleep or keep you wide awake wondering how Seth MacFarlane's mind actually works. So grab your favorite blanket, dim those lights, and let's explore the wonderfully weird universe of Quahog, Rhode Island. Trust me, by the end of this journey through Family Guy's most fascinating secrets, you'll either be peacefully snoozing or have a whole new appreciation for just how crazy this show really gets. Let's start with something that might blow your mind. Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled not once, but twice? Yeah, you heard that right. The show first got the axe in 2002 after just 3 seasons, and Fox thought they were done with the Griffin family forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The show found new life through DVD sales and reruns on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block. The ratings were so incredible that Fox literally had to eat humble pie and bring the show back in 2005. Then, believe it or not, they canceled it again in 2007, only to reverse that decision just months later. Talk about a roller coaster relationship between a network and a show. Speaking of relationships, let's talk about the voice behind our favorite talking baby, Stewie Griffin. Seth MacFarlane doesn't just voice Stewie, he also voices Brian, Peter, Glenn Quagmire, and several other characters. But here's the kicker. MacFarlane based Stewie's voice on the accent of English actor Rex Harrison, who you might know from the classic musical My Fair Lady. Yeah, that sophisticated, slightly pompous British accent that makes Stewie sound like an evil mastermind. It's straight from a Broadway legend. MacFarlane has said in interviews that he wanted Stewie to sound like an old-school English gentleman, which makes it even funnier when this supposedly refined character is plotting world domination from his crib. Now, if you think the show pushes boundaries on television, you should hear about some of the stuff that never made it to air. The writers and animators have created countless scenes, jokes, and entire storylines that were deemed too controversial even for Family Guy's standards. And considering what does make it onto television, that's really saying something. There's apparently an entire vault of unused content that could probably fill several seasons worth of episodes. Some of these rejected bits have made their way onto DVD releases as deleted scenes, but many remain locked away forever, too wild even for the show known for having no limits. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's production process. Unlike many animated series that plan out entire seasons in advance, Family Guy often operates more like a live-action sitcom. The writers frequently come up with ideas on the spot, and episodes are sometimes completely rewritten just weeks before they're supposed to air. This spontaneous approach explains why the show can feel so fresh and unpredictable, but it also leads to some pretty intense crunch times for the animation team. Imagine trying to animate complex scenes with just days to spare before broadcast. Let's dive into some character secrets that most fans never realize. Brian the dog, everyone's favorite intellectual canine, was originally supposed to be just a regular pet. In the original concept, Brian was going to be a typical dog who couldn't talk and would just bark and fetch like any normal household pet. Seth MacFarlane decided to make him a talking character at the last minute, and thank goodness he did, because Brian's philosophical conversations and sarcastic wit have become some of the show's most memorable moments. It's wild to think that one of the most complex characters almost didn't have a voice at all. The show's animation style has some fascinating secrets too. Those seemingly simple character designs actually take an enormous amount of work to create. Each character has hundreds of different facial expressions and poses that animators can mix and match. Stewie alone has over 300 different mouth positions just for speaking different sounds. The animators have to keep track of all these variations to maintain consistency across episodes. It's like having a massive digital puppet show where every single movement has to be carefully orchestrated. Here's a fact that might make you appreciate the show's music even more. Seth MacFarlane isn't just the creator, writer, and voice actor for multiple characters. He's also a legitimate recording artist who's released several albums of traditional pop standards. His musical background heavily influences the show, which is why you'll notice that Family Guy has more musical numbers than most animated comedies. Those elaborate song and dance sequences aren't just thrown in for laughs. They're crafted by someone who genuinely understands musical theater and classic American songbook traditions. The show's cultural impact goes way beyond just entertainment. Family Guy has actually influenced real-world events and conversations. Politicians have referenced the show in speeches. Academics have written scholarly papers about its social commentary, and it's been credited with introducing younger audiences to cultural references they might never have encountered otherwise. Think about how many classic movies, TV shows, songs, and historical events you first learned about through a Family Guy cutaway gag. The show serves as this weird cultural bridge between different generations of entertainment. Now let's talk about some of the show's most controversial episodes and why they're so memorable. The writers have never shied away from tackling sensitive subjects, and sometimes their approach has sparked genuine debates about comedy, censorship, and social responsibility. Some episodes have been pulled from rotation, others have been edited for different markets, and a few have become legendary among fans, specifically because they push things too far. This willingness to court controversy has kept Family Guy relevant for over 2 decades, even as television landscape has changed dramatically around it. The voice acting process for Family Guy is unlike anything you'd expect. Seth MacFarlane often records multiple characters in the same session, essentially having conversations with himself. He'll record Peter's lines, then immediately switch to Brian's voice to respond, then jump to Stewie for the next exchange. Watching him work in the recording booth is apparently like witnessing someone with multiple personality disorder having a very organized conversation with themselves. Other voice actors have said it's both impressive and slightly unsettling to watch. Here's something that connects to the show's longevity. Family Guy has aired over 400 episodes, making it one of the longest-running animated series in television history. To put that in perspective, if you watched every single episode back-to-back, you'd be sitting there for more than 150 hours straight. That's almost a full week of continuous Family Guy content. The show has literally created enough material to entertain someone for an entire week without sleeping, eating, or taking a single break. The show's international versions reveal some fascinating cultural differences. Family Guy is broadcast in dozens of countries, and each version has to navigate different censorship standards and cultural sensitivities. In some countries, entire jokes are replaced with completely different content. In others, characters' names are changed, and certain running gags are modified to make sense to local audiences. There are versions of Family Guy where the cultural references are so different that they're essentially completely different shows with the same characters. Let's explore some behind-the-scenes drama that most fans never hear about. Like any long-running show, Family Guy has had its share of creative disagreements, contract disputes, and personality conflicts. Seth MacFarlane has been very public about his occasional frustrations with the show, even stepping back from day-to-day involvement for several seasons. There have been disputes over storylines, character development, and the general direction of the show. Some former writers and voice actors have shared stories about heated arguments in writers' rooms and recording sessions that had to be stopped because of creative differences. The show's merchandising empire is absolutely massive, but some of the most interesting products never made it to market. There have been proposed Family Guy video games, theme park attractions, and even a planned Broadway musical that would have featured the Griffin family in live-action musical theater. The legal and logistical challenges of adapting animated characters for different mediums have killed dozens of potential projects over the years. Imagine walking through a Family Guy theme park, or watching actors in Peter and Lois costumes singing on Broadway. Here's a production secret that reveals how much work goes into each episode. A single 22-minute episode of Family Guy requires approximately 8 months to complete from initial concept to final broadcast. The process involves dozens of writers, voice actors, animators, sound engineers, and editors. Every single frame is reviewed multiple times. Every joke is analyzed and often rewritten. And every visual gag is carefully planned and executed. What looks like simple animation on screen represents thousands of hours of collaborative creative work. The show's relationship with censorship has created some legendary stories. There are episodes that exist in multiple versions, with different levels of content depending on when and where they're broadcast. The uncensored DVD versions of some episodes contain jokes and scenes that have never been seen on television. Meanwhile, daytime reruns are edited so heavily that some episodes are barely recognizable. The writers have learned to create content in layers, knowing that different versions will need different levels of editing for different audiences. Family Guy's influence on internet culture deserves its own discussion. The show has generated countless memes, viral videos, and online discussions. Certain episodes have become legendary specifically because of how they're shared and referenced online. The show's cutaway gag format translates perfectly to social media, where short, punchy jokes can be easily shared and remixed. Some Family Guy moments have become more famous as internet memes than they ever were as television content. The voice acting talent that has appeared on Family Guy reads like a who's who of entertainment. Celebrities often jump at the chance to appear on the show, sometimes playing themselves, sometimes voicing original characters. The guest star list includes everyone from major Hollywood actors to political figures to professional athletes. Some celebrities have become recurring characters, while others have appeared just once but created memorable moments that fans still talk about years later. Here's something that might change how you watch the show. Many of the seemingly random cutaway gags are actually carefully constructed references to specific movies, TV shows, or historical events. The writers spend considerable time researching these references to make sure they're accurate, even when they're being completely absurd. There are entire databases that catalog every cultural reference in every episode, and the depth of knowledge required to understand all the jokes is honestly staggering. The show's animation has evolved significantly over its run, but not always in ways you might expect. While the overall character designs have remained consistent, the background art, lighting effects, and scene composition have become much more sophisticated. Early episodes look almost primitive compared to recent ones, but the evolution has been so gradual that most viewers don't notice. Comparing the pilot episode to current episodes is like looking at completely different shows that happen to use the same characters. Family Guy's impact on other animated shows cannot be overstated. The success of Family Guy paved the way for countless other adult animated comedies, from American Dad to Rick and Morty to BoJack Horseman. The show proved that animated comedies could tackle adult themes and attract mature audiences, opening up an entire genre that barely existed before. Many current animators and writers cite Family Guy as a direct influence on their work and career choices. The show's approach to storytelling often breaks conventional narrative rules in fascinating ways. Episodes frequently abandon their main plots entirely for extended tangents. Characters regularly break the fourth wall to address the audience directly, and the show often parodies its own format and conventions. This meta approach to comedy requires a level of self-awareness that's rare in television, and it's part of what keeps longtime fans engaged, even after hundreds of episodes. As we wind down this journey through Family Guy's hidden world, it's worth reflecting on how a cartoon about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island became such a cultural phenomenon. The show succeeds because it taps into something fundamentally human about finding humor in chaos, about laughing at things that probably shouldn't be funny, and about the strange comfort of familiar characters behaving in completely unpredictable ways. Whether you're drifting off to sleep or wide awake thinking about animated comedy theory, Family Guy continues to surprise, offend, entertain, and occasionally enlighten its audience after more than 20 years on the air. The show's ability to constantly reinvent itself while maintaining its core identity is perhaps the most impressive fact of all. Sweet dreams, and remember, somewhere in Quahog, the Griffin family is probably getting into trouble that's even weirder than anything we've discussed tonight. The chaos never really stops. And somehow, that's exactly what makes it so perfect for helping restless minds finally find peace. Until next time, sleep tight and don't let the giant chicken nightmares bite. Hey, sleepyheads, if you're settling in for the night and need something to drift off to, you've come to the right place. Tonight, we're diving into the wonderfully weird world of Family Guy with some absolutely wild facts that'll either put you to sleep or keep you up wondering how the heck this show got away with some of this stuff. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have enough random Family Guy knowledge to impress literally no one at parties. But hey, that's what we're here for. Let's start with something that'll blow your mind. Did you know that Peter Griffin has technically been married to Lois longer in real time than some actual married couples have been together? The show premiered in 1999, which means Peter and Lois have been cartoon married for over 25 years now. That's longer than a lot of Hollywood marriages last, and considering all the ridiculous stuff Peter puts Lois through, it's honestly impressive she hasn't left him for someone with at least 2 functioning brain cells. Speaking of Peter's questionable decision-making skills, here's a fact that might make you question everything you thought you knew about the show. Peter Griffin has actually cheated on Lois multiple times throughout the series, but not always in the way you'd expect. There was that whole episode where Peter literally got injected with what the doctors called a gay gene during a medical experiment. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yes, this is as ridiculous as it sounds. Peter needed money for medical bills, saw an ad for volunteers for medical research, and being Peter, he didn't ask any questions before signing up. The doctors at this research facility were apparently working on some kind of gene therapy, and Peter ended up getting injected with this experimental serum that was supposed to make him gay. The kicker? He only did it because they offered him $125. That's right, Peter Griffin's sexuality was temporarily altered, for the price of a decent vacuum cleaner. Only on Family Guy would someone's entire identity shift because of what amounts to pocket change. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once the serum kicked in, Peter didn't just become gay, he became like stereotypically gay. We're talking about a guy who suddenly knew all the best brunch spots in town and started making homemade muffins. Lois was initially upset about the whole situation until she tasted those muffins, and then she was suddenly okay with having a gay husband. It's like she discovered the secret to getting Peter to actually contribute to household duties was a medical experiment gone wrong. The really wild part is that Peter ended up getting a boyfriend named Scott, and he was completely ready to leave his entire family for this guy. Peter literally told Lois he was leaving her for his new soulmate, packed his bags, and started living his best gay life. They went to fancy restaurants, which is probably more romantic attention than Lois had gotten in years, and Peter was genuinely happy. The effects were supposed to wear off eventually, but nobody knew when. The doctor said it could be anywhere from a week to a year, which is quite possibly the most unhelpful medical diagnosis in television history. Meanwhile, Brian and Stewie decided they needed to fix this situation, so they sent Peter to what was essentially conversion therapy, which obviously didn't work. Scott got worried when Peter disappeared for 2 days and showed up at the Griffin house looking for him. When Lois found out what Brian had done, she wasn't happy, and they all rushed to rescue Peter from this ridiculous straight camp. Here's the kicker, though. When Peter and Scott were finally reunited, Scott had a special surprise planned. Remember how Peter had mentioned that his ultimate fantasy was to have an 11-way? Well, Scott made that happen. Can you imagine being in Peter's shoes when the effects finally wore off after 2.5 weeks? The man went from living his best life to probably needing serious therapy. But that wasn't even the only time Peter stepped out on his marriage. There was another incident involving his special mirrored sunglasses that accidentally revealed he was getting calls from a secret boyfriend. Peter was playing poker, and because he's Peter, he was wearing these ridiculous sunglasses that basically showed everyone his cards. But that wasn't even the stupidest part. When his phone rang during the game, everyone could see in his sunglasses that the contact was saved as his secret boyfriend. The man literally had no concept of how to keep a secret. Peter's excuse for taking the call? He told everyone it was his wife. Smooth, Peter. Real smooth. This is the same guy who somehow managed to maintain an entire second family in Chicago. That's right. Peter Griffin had a whole other life where he pretended to be the mother of someone else's children. He would tell his real family he was going on business trips, fly to Chicago, change clothes in a taxi, and then show up at this other house where a bunch of kids would greet him like he was their mom. I have so many questions about this arrangement that I don't think I want answered. Like, whose kids were those? How did this living situation even come about? And most importantly, how did Peter manage to keep this secret when he couldn't even hide a boyfriend's contact information on his phone? The man's inconsistency is honestly impressive. Then there was the time Peter got amnesia and forgot he was married to Lois entirely. This happened when the Griffin family somehow ended up on Family Feud, because of course they did. Peter got into a fight with Richard Dawson, which honestly seems about right for Peter's personality. and ended up flying headfirst into a table. The impact gave him complete amnesia, and he had no idea who Lois or his kids were. The doctor said Peter's memory could come back anywhere from days to years, which again, super helpful medical advice. Lois tried everything to jog his memory, including showing him old home movies, but Peter just got distracted by random things in the background. The man's attention span was somehow even worse with amnesia than it was normally. Here's where things got weird, though. Peter might not have remembered being married to Lois, but some things about his personality remained intact, like the fact that he was a complete pervert. He started creeping on Lois, not realizing she was actually his wife and that he could just ask her to sleep with him. When Lois explained the situation, Peter was over the moon. He basically got to lose his virginity all over again, except this time with someone who actually knew what they were doing. But Peter's amnesia brain didn't quite understand the boundaries of marriage. He seemed to think that if he could sleep with Lois, he could probably sleep with anyone in the house. This led to Lois having to explain, in the most awkward way possible, that he couldn't have relations with the kids. That's a sentence no parent should ever have to say. But then again, this is Peter Griffin we're talking about. The amnesia situation got even more complicated when Peter decided he didn't want to be married anymore. He thought the whole concept was stupid and decided to become a bachelor. So suddenly, Lois and the kids were kicked out of their own house and had to move to a crappy apartment in the city, while Peter lived it up as a single man. He was throwing parties, bringing home different women every night, and generally living like he was 25 years old instead of a middle-aged father of 3. The really messed up part is that Peter got his memory back after about a day, but he decided to keep pretending he had amnesia because he was enjoying the bachelor lifestyle too much. Meanwhile, Quagmire was making moves on Lois in her vulnerable state, and Brian had to rush to tell Peter what was happening. Peter finally confessed that his memory had returned, but only because he didn't want Quagmire sleeping with his wife. The fact that he was willing to abandon his family for random hookups but drew the line at Quagmire says a lot about Peter's priorities. One of the most bizarre cheating incidents involved Peter falling in love with a cardboard cutout. This wasn't some quick gag either. Peter literally brought home a cardboard stand-up of model Kathy Ireland and treated it like a real relationship. He introduced the cutout to his kids, took it out to dinner, and somehow managed to have what he considered a physical relationship with it. The logistics of this situation are something I don't think anyone wants to think too hard about. Peter was so committed to this cardboard romance that he told his kids Kathy was their new mom. Lois was still living in the house and honestly seemed pretty unbothered by the whole thing. She figured it would blow over eventually, and she was probably right, except that Chris decided to take Kathy into his room for his own purposes. When Peter found out, he was so angry that he shook the cutout, and her cardboard head literally fell off, ending the relationship in the most anticlimactic way possible. The show also had this meta episode where they pretended to show behind-the-scenes footage of the Family Guy cast, and in this fake documentary, we found out that Peter was supposedly cheating on Lois with an 18-year-old intern. When confronted about the naked pictures on his phone, Peter's excuse was that his phone number used to belong to the intern's ex-boyfriend, so the pictures were sent by mistake. Then, when pressed further, he claimed it was the cloud's fault. The cloud people. Peter Griffin blamed technology for his infidelity. What made this even worse was that Lois revealed this had happened 5 times, and some of the pictures actually had Peter in them too. At this point, you have to wonder about Lois's self-respect, but then again, she's been putting up with Peter's nonsense for over 2 decades, so maybe she's just developed an immunity to his stupidity. Throughout all of these incidents, there's this running theme of Peter having absolutely no understanding of how relationships work. Whether he's temporarily gay, suffering from amnesia, or falling in love with cardboard, he consistently makes choices that any reasonable person would recognize as relationship ending. Yet somehow, Lois always takes him back, and they return to their dysfunctional but apparently unbreakable marriage. The fascinating thing about Peter's various infidelities is how they reflect different aspects of his character. When he's gay, he becomes more thoughtful and domestic. When he has amnesia, his base instincts take over. When he's with the cardboard cutout, it shows his complete detachment from reality. Each scenario reveals something different about what makes Peter tick, even if none of it makes him a better husband. What's really interesting is how the show treats these situations as comedy rather than serious relationship problems. In real life, Most of these incidents would result in divorce, therapy, or at minimum, some serious conversations about boundaries and commitment. But in the Family Guy universe, they're just Tuesday. Peter can maintain a secret family, inject himself with experimental drugs, or forget his wife exists entirely, and by the end of the episode, everything goes back to normal. This reflects the show's overall approach to continuity and consequences. Family Guy operates in a world where actions don't have lasting impact, where characters can experience major life changes that are completely forgotten by the next episode. It's part of what allows the show to push boundaries and explore ridiculous scenarios without worrying about long-term narrative consistency. The fact that Peter has cheated on Lois in so many different ways also highlights the show's commitment to mining comedy from uncomfortable situations. Seth MacFarlane and the writing team seem to delight in finding new ways to make Peter an even worse husband, while somehow keeping him sympathetic enough that audiences don't completely turn against him. And there you have it, folks. Peter Griffin's extensive history of marital infidelity, from gay gene experiments to cardboard cutout romances. Sweet dreams. And try not to think too hard about the logistics of any of this. If you enjoyed learning about Peter's questionable relationship choices, make sure to subscribe for more random animated facts that serve no practical purpose but might help you fall asleep. Until next time, keep it weird, keep it random, and remember that somewhere out there, Peter Griffin is probably doing something that would end most marriages but will be completely forgotten by next episode. Picture this. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m, and suddenly, you remember that time Peter Griffin literally married a cardboard cutout of himself. Welcome to the weird, wild world of Family Guy, where the most random facts are often the most fascinating ones. Tonight, we're diving deep into the strangest corners of Quahog, with facts so bizarre they'll either help you drift off to sleep or keep you awake, wondering how the writers even came up with this stuff. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind. Did you know that the original concept for Family Guy was completely different from what we got? Seth MacFarlane initially pitched the show as a much darker comedy about a dysfunctional family dealing with serious issues. The network executives were so confused by the pilot that they almost didn't pick it up. Thank goodness they did. Because otherwise, we wouldn't have gems like the time Brian became a used car salesman and accidentally sold Death his own car. Speaking of Brian, here's a fact that might surprise you. The character was originally supposed to be much more of a background character, basically just the family pet who occasionally made sarcastic comments. But Seth MacFarlane loved voicing him so much that Brian gradually became one of the main characters. This explains why Brian's personality seems to evolve so dramatically throughout the early seasons. He went from being a simple talking dog to a pretentious intellectual with daddy issues and a drinking problem. Now let's talk about something truly random. The chicken fight scenes between Peter and Ernie the giant chicken weren't supposed to become a recurring gag. The first fight scene in the episode Da Boom was meant to be a one-off joke. But the animators had so much fun creating the elaborate fight sequence that they kept bringing it back. Each subsequent chicken fight got more elaborate and destructive, eventually involving helicopters, submarines, and entire city blocks being demolished. The longest chicken fight lasted nearly 4 minutes of screen time, which is practically an eternity in television comedy. Here's something that'll make you appreciate the show's attention to detail. Every time you see the Griffin house, the layout is actually consistent throughout the series. The creators took the time to map out every room, every hallway, every closet in the house, so that when characters move around, it makes spatial sense. This is incredibly rare in animated comedies, where houses often have impossible layouts that change depending on what the joke requires. The Griffin House blueprints are actually available online, and fans have used them to build accurate replicas in video games and even real life. Moving on to character quirks. Did you know that Meg's unpopularity at school was originally supposed to be temporary? The writers planned to have her eventually find her place and become more confident, but the running gag of everyone treating Meg terribly became so popular with audiences that they decided to make it a permanent part of her character. Mila Kunis, who voices Meg, has said in interviews that she sometimes feels bad about all the abuse her character receives, but she understands that it's become essential to the show's dynamic. Let's dive into some voice acting trivia that's perfect for late-night pondering. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 main characters on the show, but he almost didn't voice Stewie at all. The original plan was to have Stewie voiced by a child actor, but MacFarlane was worried about the controversial things Stewie would say and didn't want to put a real child in that position. So he developed Stewie's distinctive British accent as a way to make the character's adult thoughts coming from a baby's mouth even more surreal and funny. Chris Griffin's voice is another interesting story. Seth Green, who voices Chris, has to actively make his voice higher and more nasal to sound, like a teenage boy. As Green has gotten older, it's become more challenging for him to hit those high notes, so the sound engineers often have to digitally adjust his voice in post-production. This is why Chris's voice sometimes sounds slightly different between episodes, depending on how much digital manipulation was required. Here's a fact that connects to real-world events in a weird way. The episode where Peter starts his own political party called the Tea Party Patriots was written and animated before the actual Tea Party movement became prominent in American politics. When the episode aired, many viewers thought it was a commentary on current events, but it was actually just an incredible coincidence. The writers had to add a disclaimer explaining that any similarity to real political movements was purely accidental. Now for something completely different. The Pawtucket Brewery, where Peter works, is based on a real brewery in Rhode Island. Seth MacFarlane grew up in the area and used to drive past the brewery every day. He thought it would be funny to have his lazy cartoon character work at a place that produces something that would make him even lazier. The real brewery owners were initially concerned about being associated with the show, but eventually embraced it when they realized it was bringing them tourists. Let's talk about some of the show's more obscure running gags. You know how Conway Twitty always seems to appear at random moments? This started as an inside joke among the writers who were fans of old country music. They would play Conway Twitty songs during late-night writing sessions to keep themselves awake. Eventually, they decided to work him into the show as a bizarre non-sequitur that would confuse viewers and break up the pacing in unexpected ways. The Conway Twitty segments are actually some of the most expensive parts of the show to produce because they have to pay for the music rights. Here's something that'll make you look at Cleveland differently. When Cleveland got his own spin-off show, the original plan was for him to stay in Quahog, and the spin-off would focus on his adventures around town. But the writers realized that would be too limiting, so they created the elaborate storyline where his house gets destroyed and he moves to Virginia. The bathtub falling through multiple houses scene took months to animate and became one of the most memorable moments in the show's history, even though it was essentially just a setup for a spin-off that only lasted 4 seasons. Speaking of spin-offs, did you know that there was almost a Stewie and Brian road trip series? The popularity of their travel episodes convinced executives that the dynamic between the sophisticated baby and the intellectual dog could carry its own show. Scripts were written for 6 episodes before the project was scrapped due to budget concerns. Some of those unused scripts were later reworked into regular Family Guy episodes, which explains why some Stewie and Brian adventures feel more elaborate than usual. Let's get into some animation secrets that most viewers never notice. The way characters' eyes are drawn actually follows a complex mathematical formula to ensure they always look natural when the characters move their heads. This might sound boring, but it's actually fascinating when you realize that most animated shows just wing it and hope for the best. Family Guy's attention to eye movement is part of what makes the characters feel more alive and expressive than typical cartoon characters. Here's a weird fact about the show's merchandising history. The most popular Family Guy product ever sold wasn't a t-shirt or a toy. It was a cookbook called the Family Guy Cookbook that featured recipes supposedly created by each character. Peter's section was all comfort food and beer-based dishes. Lois had elegant dinner party recipes. Stewie contributed sophisticated international cuisine. And Brian's section was dinner for 15, entirely vegetarian. The cookbook actually received positive reviews from real food critics, which nobody expected. Now for some trivia about the show's cancellation and revival that goes beyond what most people know. When Family Guy was first canceled, Seth MacFarlane was actually relieved. He was exhausted from working on the show and wanted to pursue other projects. But the DVD sales were so strong and the fan campaign so persistent that Fox offered him a deal he couldn't refuse, including complete creative control and a substantial budget increase. This is why the post-cancellation episodes often feel more ambitious and experimental than the early ones. The show's relationship with censors has always been complicated. But here's something most people don't realize. Family Guy actually has one of the most cooperative relationships with network censors of any adult animated show. Seth MacFarlane learned early on that if you give censors multiple options and let them feel like they're part of the creative process, they'll often let you get away with more controversial content. The writers deliberately write jokes they know will get cut, just so they can negotiate to keep the jokes they really want. Let's talk about some character backstories that were developed but never made it into episodes. Quagmire was originally supposed to have a twin brother who was everything he wasn't, completely respectful and monogamous. This character was going to be introduced as a way to explore Quagmire's personality through contrast, but the writers decided it would be funnier to keep him as an irredeemable character without any redemptive family members to soften his edges. Joe Swanson's backstory is much more detailed than what we see on screen. The writers created an entire timeline of his police career before his accident, including the names of his partners, his most famous cases, and even his police academy graduation rank. None of this has ever been mentioned in the show, but it helps the writers keep his character consistent and gives them material to draw from when they need Joe to demonstrate police knowledge or skills. Here's something about the show's music that might surprise you. Every musical number in Family Guy is performed live by the voice actors, even when their characters are supposed to be bad singers. Seth MacFarlane, who has released several jazz albums, insisted on this approach because he believes it makes the musical moments feel more authentic. This means that when Peter sings off-key, Seth MacFarlane is actually deliberately singing badly, which is apparently much harder than just singing well. The relationship between Family Guy and The Simpsons goes deeper than their famous crossover episode. The two shows' writing staffs have been trading jokes and references for years in a friendly rivalry that most viewers never notice. If you watch carefully, you'll spot subtle Simpsons references in Family Guy episodes and vice versa. This tradition started when several Family Guy writers were hired away from The Simpsons, and they maintained friendships with their former colleagues. Now, here's a production fact that explains a lot about the show's pacing. Family Guy episodes are actually written to be about 30 minutes long, but they're edited down to fit the 22-minute television format. This means there are about 8 minutes of content cut from every episode. These deleted scenes aren't just throwaway jokes either. They often contain character development and plot details that would make the episodes feel more complete. Some of these deleted scenes have been released on DVD collections, and they often change how you interpret the episodes. The show's approach to celebrity guest stars is completely different from most animated comedies. Instead of having celebrities play themselves or obvious parodies of themselves, Family Guy often casts them as completely random characters. This creates a fun game for viewers who recognize the voices but can't immediately place where they know them from. Adam West playing the mayor was the template for this approach, and it's been incredibly successful at attracting high-profile guest stars who want to try something different. Let's explore some of the show's more philosophical elements that get overlooked because of all the random humor. The relationship between Stewie and Brian is actually a sophisticated exploration of the friendship between youth and experience. Stewie represents unlimited potential and ambition, while Brian represents the reality of compromise and disappointment that comes with age. Their adventures often end with both characters learning something, but in subtle ways that don't feel preachy or forced. The show's treatment of time travel and alternate realities follows surprisingly consistent rules. The writers created an internal logic system for how these sci-fi elements work in the Family Guy universe, even though they rarely explain it to viewers. This attention to detail is why the time travel episodes feel coherent instead of just random, and it allows them to create genuine consequences for the characters' actions across multiple episodes. Here's something about the animation process that most people never consider. Each episode of Family Guy requires approximately 15,000 individual drawings. The animators have developed shortcuts and techniques to make this process more efficient, but it still takes about 8 months from the initial script to the finished episode. This explains why the show sometimes references events that seem outdated by the time the episode airs. The references were current when the episode was being written and animated. The voice recording process is also more complex than most people realize. While some animated shows record all the voices separately, Family Guy often records the main cast together in the same room. This creates more natural-sounding conversations and allows the actors to play off each other's energy. Seth MacFarlane switches between his different character voices during these sessions, which the other actors say is both impressive and slightly disturbing to witness in person. Now for some trivia about the show's impact on popular culture that goes beyond the obvious memes and catchphrases. Family Guy has been credited with popularizing the rapid-fire pop culture reference style that's now common in comedy. Before Family Guy, most TV shows would make 1 or 2 cultural references per episode. Family Guy started making dozens of references per episode, training audiences to catch quick jokes and creating a more interactive viewing experience. The show's influence on internet culture is also significant. Family Guy was one of the first TV shows to embrace online fan communities and viral marketing. The creators regularly engage with fans on social media and have incorporated fan suggestions into actual episodes. This relationship between creators and fans has become the standard for modern entertainment. But Family Guy was pioneering this approach when most TV executives were still afraid of the internet. Finally, here's a fact that brings everything full circle. Despite all the random humor and bizarre storylines, Family Guy is actually one of the most carefully planned shows on television. Every season has an overarching theme that connects the episodes, even though these themes are subtle enough that most viewers don't consciously notice them. The writers map out character development arcs that span multiple seasons, ensuring that even the most outrageous episodes contribute to larger storytelling goals. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that somewhere in the world, there are people whose full-time job is deciding exactly how long Peter Griffin's fights with a giant chicken should last. Sweet dreams, and may your nights be filled with fewer random cutaway gags than the average Family Guy episode. Picture this. You're lying in bed, eyes heavy, ready to drift off into dreamland. But instead of counting sheep, what if I told you some absolutely wild facts about one of television's most chaotic families? Tonight, we're diving deep into the bizarre, hilarious, and sometimes disturbing world of Family Guy, with facts so strange, they might just lull you into the most entertaining sleep of your life. So get comfortable, dim those lights, and let me take you on a journey through Quahog that's perfect for your bedtime routine. Whether you're a die-hard fan or just need something to occupy your mind as you wind down, these Family Guy facts will give you plenty to think about as you drift off to sleep. Let's start with something that might surprise you about the show's creation. Family Guy almost never made it to air in the first place. Seth MacFarlane created the pilot when he was just 24 years old, working as a writer and animator for Hanna-Barbera. The original pilot was so different from what we know today that it's almost unrecognizable. Brian wasn't even supposed to be the sophisticated martini-drinking intellectual we know and love. Originally, he was just going to be a regular dog who occasionally spoke. But MacFarlane decided that having a talking dog who acted completely normal would be funnier than having one who was still essentially just a pet. Speaking of Brian, here's a fact that might keep you thinking as you fall asleep. Brian Griffin is technically immortal in some episodes, but ages normally in others. The show has never been consistent about whether Brian ages like a regular dog or if he's somehow exempt from typical canine lifespans. In some episodes, he's mentioned to be around 7 years old in dog years, which would make him middle-aged. But in others, he references events from decades ago, as if he experienced them personally. This inconsistency is just one of many things that make Family Guy's continuity so fascinatingly chaotic. Now, let's talk about Stewie Griffin, the baby genius with questionable intentions. Did you know that Stewie's sexuality has been a subject of debate not just among fans but actually within the show's writing room? Seth MacFarlane has stated in interviews that Stewie is meant to be gay, but the character's sexuality has been portrayed inconsistently throughout the series. In early episodes, Stewie had crushes on various female characters, but later seasons have shown him with clear attractions to male characters. The writers have deliberately kept this ambiguous, which adds another layer to Stewie's already complex character. Here's something that might give you pleasant dreams. The voice actors for Family Guy are incredibly talented beyond just their work on the show. Seth MacFarlane, who voices Peter, Brian, and Stewie, is also an accomplished singer who has released several jazz albums. His singing voice is so good that he's performed with major orchestras and has even done tribute concerts to classic crooners like Frank Sinatra. Imagine Peter Griffin serenading you to sleep with smooth jazz standards. Let's dive into some facts about the show's most controversial character, Peter Griffin himself. Peter's weight has been a running gag throughout the series. But did you know that his exact weight has been mentioned multiple times with wildly different numbers? In some episodes, he's said to weigh around 270 pounds, while in others, the number jumps to over 300. The inconsistency is intentional, reflecting how the show treats Peter's physical characteristics as fluid depending on what's funniest for any given episode. Peter's job history is another source of endless entertainment and confusion. Throughout the series, he's worked at a toy factory, a brewery, various other random jobs, and has even been unemployed for extended periods. But here's what's interesting. The show never explains how the Griffin family maintains their lifestyle during Peter's unemployed periods. They live in a decent house in what appears to be a middle-class neighborhood, yet Peter's employment status seems to have no impact on their standard of living. It's one of those cartoon logic elements that you just have to accept. Speaking of the Griffin house, have you ever noticed that the layout seems to change between episodes? Sometimes there are rooms that appear out of nowhere, and other times, familiar rooms seem to vanish. The basement, in particular, seems to change size and purpose depending on the episode's needs. In some episodes, it's a small storage space, while in others, it's large enough to hold elaborate contraptions or even entire gatherings. This kind of flexible architecture is common in animated shows, but Family Guy takes it to particularly absurd lengths. Let's talk about Meg Griffin, the family's perpetual punching bag. Here's a fact that might surprise you. Meg was originally supposed to be the most normal character in the family, serving as the audience's point of view into this chaotic household. But as the show evolved, the writers found it funnier to make her the target of everyone's abuse. This shift happened gradually over the first few seasons, and by the time it was fully established, Meg had transformed from a relatable teenager into a character whose suffering was played for laughs. The voice of Meg has also changed throughout the series. Originally voiced by Lacey Chabert, the role was taken over by Mila Kunis starting in Season 2. The transition was so seamless that many viewers didn't even notice the change. Kunis was actually still a teenager when she started voicing Meg, making her closer in age to the character than most voice actors are to their animated counterparts. Here's a soothing fact about the show's animation style. Family Guy uses a technique called cutaway gags that allows for infinite creative possibilities. These brief segments, usually introduced by phrases like, "This is worse than the time," allow the animators to create completely different scenarios, time periods, and art styles within a single episode. Some of these cutaways reference obscure pop culture moments, while others create entirely fictional scenarios. The animators have said that creating these cutaways is one of the most enjoyable parts of working on the show because there are virtually no limitations on what they can create. Let's discuss some facts about Quahog, the fictional Rhode Island town where the Griffins live. The town's name is actually a type of clam, which is fitting given Rhode Island's coastal location. But here's what's interesting. The geography of Quahog seems to change depending on the episode's needs. Sometimes it's portrayed as a small town where everyone knows each other, while other times it seems large enough to support multiple shopping districts, airports, and major venues. The town has everything from a small town feel to big city amenities, depending on what the plot requires. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter and his friends hang out, is based on real bars that McFarlane frequented during his college years. The atmosphere and the type of conversations that happen there are drawn from McFarlane's actual experiences, which explains why the dialogue often feels so authentic despite the absurd situations. Here's something that might help you drift off. The show's theme song is intentionally designed to be catchy and memorable, but it's also shorter than most television theme songs. This was a deliberate choice to maximize the amount of time available for actual content in each episode. The brevity of the theme song allows for more jokes and story development, which is part of why Family Guy episodes often feel packed with content. Let's talk about some of the show's recurring characters and their origins. Glenn Quagmire, the Griffins' oversexed neighbor, was originally conceived as a minor character who would appear occasionally, but the writers found his character so entertaining that he became a regular part of the cast. His distinctive laugh and catchphrase, "giggity," weren't in the original character design, but developed naturally as the voice actor, Seth MacFarlane, experimented with the character's vocal patterns. Cleveland Brown, Peter's friend who eventually got his own spin-off show, was originally going to be a very different character. The writers initially conceived him as being more similar to Peter in personality, but they decided it would be funnier to make him the calm, rational member of the group. This decision led to Cleveland becoming the voice of reason among Peter's friends, often serving as a counterbalance to their more outrageous behavior. Joe Swanson, the paraplegic police officer, was created to add diversity to the show's cast, but the writers were careful to make his disability just one aspect of his character rather than his defining trait. In many episodes, Joe is the most competent and heroic character, often solving problems that the other characters can't handle. His wheelchair is rarely portrayed as a limitation, and he's often shown doing things that would be impossible for anyone, disabled or not. Here's a relaxing fact about the show's production schedule. Family Guy episodes are typically produced months in advance, which allows the animators and voice actors to take their time perfecting each episode. Unlike live-action shows that have to rush to meet weekly deadlines, animated shows like Family Guy can spend weeks on individual scenes, ensuring that every joke lands and every visual gag is perfectly timed. The show's writer's room operates on a collaborative system where anyone can contribute ideas, regardless of their official role on the show. This has led to some of the show's most memorable moments coming from unexpected sources. Sometimes the person responsible for continuity might suggest a joke that becomes central to an episode, or a voice actor might improvise a line that becomes a recurring catchphrase. Let's discuss some facts about the show's cultural impact that might give you something peaceful to think about as you fall asleep. Family Guy has been translated into dozens of languages, and each version faces the challenge of adapting American cultural references for international audiences. Some jokes that work perfectly in English become completely different jokes in other languages, while others are replaced entirely with references that local audiences will understand. The show's influence on internet culture has been enormous. Many of Family Guy's cutaway gags and memorable quotes have become memes that spread far beyond the show's original audience. The phrase, "Oh no," in Peter's distinctive voice, for example, became a popular reaction GIF used in contexts that have nothing to do with the show itself. Here's something interesting about the show's approach to celebrity guest stars. Unlike many animated shows that cast celebrities to voice characters similar to themselves, Family Guy often has famous people voice characters that are completely different from their real personalities. This approach has led to some surprising and entertaining performances that showcase different sides of well-known actors and musicians. The show's approach to continuity is deliberately inconsistent, which actually makes it more relaxing to watch in some ways. You don't need to remember every detail from previous episodes to understand what's happening, because the show often contradicts its own established facts for the sake of a good joke. This means you can watch episodes in any order and still enjoy them fully, which is perfect for casual viewing or when you're trying to wind down. Let's talk about some facts about the show's music and sound design. Family Guy employs a full orchestra for many of its musical numbers, which is unusual for an animated television series. This attention to musical detail means that even throwaway songs and cutaway gags are often surprisingly well-produced and catchy. The show's composers have backgrounds in both television and theatrical music, which explains why many of the musical segments feel like they could work on stage. The sound effects in Family Guy are often created in unusual ways. The iconic sound of Peter falling down and hurting himself, which happens in almost every episode, is actually a combination of several different sounds layered together. The voice actors often provide their own sound effects during recording sessions, which gives the show a more organic feel than if all the sounds were added in post-production. Here's a fact that might help you smile as you drift off. The show's animators often hide small details in backgrounds that only the most observant viewers will notice. These Easter eggs can be anything from references to other shows, inside jokes among the production staff, or even tiny animations that have nothing to do with the main story. Finding these hidden details has become a hobby for some fans, who watch episodes multiple times just to catch things they missed. The show's approach to time and aging is fascinatingly inconsistent. While the characters never seem to get older, the show acknowledges the passage of time in other ways. Technology updates, cultural references change, and real-world events are incorporated into episodes. This creates a strange temporal bubble where the characters exist in a perpetual present that somehow includes decades of cultural history. Let's discuss some production facts that showcase the incredible amount of work that goes into each episode. A single episode of Family Guy requires thousands of individual drawings, even though much of the animation is now done digitally. Each character expression, each background element, and each special effect needs to be designed and animated individually. The attention to detail is remarkable when you consider how quickly episodes need to be produced. The voice recording process is also more complex than you might expect. While Seth MacFarlane voices multiple characters, he rarely records them in conversation with each other during the same session. Instead, each character's lines are recorded separately, and the conversations are constructed in post-production. This means that MacFarlane has to imagine how his different characters would interact with each other and adjust his performance accordingly. Here's something soothing to consider. Despite all the chaos and controversy surrounding Family Guy, the show has created jobs for hundreds of people over its many seasons. Animators, voice actors, writers, musicians, sound engineers, and countless other professionals have built careers working on this show. In a way, all of this absurd humor has created a small community of creative people who work together to bring these ridiculous stories to life. The show's international success has also led to cultural exchange in unexpected ways. American animators have learned techniques from international studios, while animators from other countries have brought their own cultural perspectives to American television. This cross-pollination of ideas has enriched the medium of animation as a whole. As we near the end of our journey through these Family Guy facts, let's consider something that might give you pleasant dreams. The show's enduring popularity suggests that there's something universally appealing about stories of dysfunctional families who, despite all their problems, somehow stick together. Even though the Griffin family is exaggerated to absurd proportions, there's something recognizable about their dynamics that resonates with audiences around the world. The show's ability to find humor in everyday situations, even when those situations are taken to impossible extremes, reflects a fundamentally optimistic view of life. No matter how bad things get, there's always something to laugh about. This perspective can be oddly comforting when you're trying to wind down from your own day's challenges. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, you can think about this wild, wonderful, and completely unpredictable animated world where anything can happen, where the impossible is routine, and where laughter is always just around the corner. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a Quahog evening, minus all the explosions and chaos, of course. Whether you're a longtime fan or someone who's just discovered these bizarre facts, I hope this journey through Family Guy's strange universe has given you something entertaining to think about as you fall asleep. Remember, in the world of animation, anything is possible, and tomorrow is just another opportunity for new adventures and unexpected laughs.